Hi GTOger fans, welcome to the channel. We're going to do a video today that some of you have requested. I've filmed in here before, and it's our little conference room and computer museum at the office. You can see plenty of computers and old hardware behind me, and some of you guys have been curious as to what that's all about, or could we see a little bit more of some of the machines? So yes, we can do that. We haven't had any tow trucks stop by in a little while because of the situation that we find ourselves in, and things haven't quite reopened here in Deep Ellum yet. So we'll do something a little bit different, and maybe you'll find it interesting. Stick with me. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the computers in here, and this computer in particular, and why it's special to me. When the company that I work for was founded back in 1977, the founders sort of recognized very early on that there were two ways they could go about their outsourced management business. One of those ways would be to employ floors full of people in a giant office building, and the other way would be to embrace the emerging personal computers and automate a lot of the things that would otherwise take a lot of individual people a lot of time to do. So these days, computers come basically in one of two flavors. You're either PC on Windows or you're Mac. But back in the early days of personal computers, they came in all sorts of different flavors. If you look behind me here, we've got all sorts of different styles, shapes, sizes, colors, and they ran all sorts of different operating systems. And some of them were proprietary, and some of them were actually commercial systems that were used across multiple platforms. But a lot of these computers were made in a time before everybody had really gotten a chance to figure out what made a personal computer a personal computer. So you had a lot of different variety. The founders of my company really explored those early computers and did their best to try to shake out what worked for them and what ran the right applications for the time. They used systems from companies like IBM and Apple, Texas Instruments, Commodore, Tandy, Lanier. There was even a computer called the Computer for People Who Love Money. Look it up, it's a real thing. Well, as one system would get replaced by a newer system, the old system would typically get packed up and put in a box and placed into storage. And a few years ago, when we were moving around some offices, we cleaned out a lot of the storage and decided if we're going to keep some of these old computers, let's put them on display, because it's kind of fun to look back at our history and where we came from, and kind of gets you to thinking how far we've come. So that's why these computers are all sitting in the conference room and all set up in our little computer museum. So that's what makes this little collection of computers unique. There are certainly much larger collections that are much more comprehensive and show a complete computing history. That's not what this collection is about, and that's not what this channel is all about. If you want a real deep dive into all sorts of interesting old computers, there are channels like LGR and the 8-Bit Guy and others out there who are going to do a much better job. What I'd like to do here today is show you one of these computers in particular and tell you a little bit about what makes it special to me. This is an Apple IIc, and it comes from the time of members-only jackets, Knight Rider, and people with inexplicable net clothing. Apple had just introduced the Macintosh in January of 1984. There were a lot of people, Apple II users out there, who were very nervous that this meant the end of the Apple II. So almost in direct response to that, and also in a partial response to IBM having introduced its PC Junior line, Apple hosted their Apple II Forever event. Now this was an enormous event. If you look back onto some of Steve Jobs' introductions of the iPhone and the iPad, those events were really patterned after the Apple II Forever event. And at Apple II Forever in 1984, they introduced the Apple IIc. The Apple IIc was really the culmination of more than 10 years of development of the Apple II system. In fact, the Apple IIc is essentially the same hardware as an Apple IIe, but a lot of it has been consolidated down. In fact, they took 5 or so expansion cards that would take up a lot of room in an Apple IIe case and consolidated all of that down to just chips on the motherboard of the Apple IIc. So while some of the Apple II faithful complained that the Apple IIc had a real lack of expandability. Pretty much everything that you needed the Apple II to do was built right in. There was no need to expand from that. That really paved the way for the new direction of Apple, which was to consolidate as many things as possible into a single closed design, rather than what's typical in the PC world of having expandable cases and parts and pieces that you're going to be replacing or upgrading or adding to on a semi-regular basis. One of the other integrated features of the Apple IIc is the disk drive. While on previous Apple II systems, you needed a large, bulky box to house your floppy disk drive, the IIc also has built-in connectors for a joystick or mouse, external disk drive, video, a modem port and serial ports, printer. So everything that you might need to do, you can plug right into the computer. So what used to take up a lot of real estate on a table could now be consolidated down to the corner of a desk. And that was just perfect for a kid like me. I used this computer to do things like schoolwork and book reports. I played games on it. I would take it to friends' houses and we would print banners and posters to put up on our walls. This computer also taught me to program. Obviously, people have been programming on computers since long before the Apple II, but this computer is where I happen to personally get involved in writing my own programs. Back in the day when this computer was new and I was a kid in middle school, programs wouldn't always just come out on floppy disks, and there was no internet for us to get on and start downloading programs. So a good way to get a new program was to go to the newsstand or your local bookstore, buy the latest magazine, and then take that home. The magazine would have the code to the program actually printed in the pages as an article. In order to run that program, you had to get that magazine and then type all of that code into the computer. Sometimes you wound up with a cool program to run. Sometimes you had a fun game to play. And a lot of times you made a lot of typos and you didn't get a very good result at all. But when things failed, that's what helped me learn to program, because I would go back through the code, find out what went wrong, correct it, and see if that would fix it. My friends and I would often write little programs on the computer. One of those was a word game. Now, if you're not familiar with word games, you might have heard of an old program called the Oregon Trail. And this is something that goes back, I think, to the early mid-70s and went on through the early 90s. It was essentially a text-based program which would print out a little story, you would choose a character, and then it would give you choices on what decision you would like to make. And based on the decision that you would make, you would either progress in the game or more likely you would just die of dysentery. While in the Oregon Trail, you played the part of a 19th century pioneer. In the game that I wrote with my friend Jeff, you play the part of the main character who got into an altercation with an evil android by the name of Weston Xandar. And of course, as androids do, he planted a microchip in your head that would explode on command, and it's up to you to find out how to disable that microchip in your head and avoid nuclear Armageddon for the entire world. We were 6th graders, and our influences were James Bond, Star Wars, and the Cold War, so you get what you get. The other program that I wrote had a much more practical purpose. My parents had season tickets to the Dallas Mavericks when they were just a new NBA franchise team. I used to love going to the games with them, but as a kid, those games on weeknights, well, that was going to be much past my bedtime on a school night. But I was interested in knowing the outcome of the game, even if it ended well past when I was asleep. So I created a program that knew all of the team names, their colors, and some basic stats. And I called that program the 2C Mavs Checkout. Catchy. When my parents got home from the game, they'd check in on us kids, and then before they went to bed, they'd have to sit down at my trusty Apple IIc and complete the checkout. They would answer some basic questions about the outcome of the game, who some of the players were, and if there were some standout moments. Then when they were done answering their questions, they would hit a key that would blank the screen for the night. When I would wake up the next morning, I'd run over to the computer, hit the return key, and it would tell me everything that I needed to know about the game that had happened the night before. When I think back to computers like this, it's easy to get nostalgic and think about the good old days. And you know, computers today are way more powerful and far more useful, but sometimes they're just not as fun. I think a certain amount of that is, of course, looking back with rose-colored glasses. But at the same time, when this computer was new, computers were something that people used to create things rather than just consume things. Modern computers are far easier to use and, frankly, more useful. They're more powerful than ever before. They're better in pretty much every measurable way. But when we're using computers these days, we're doing so largely as consumers. We may be typing reports or checking our social media, but if you're using this computer, you're having to figure out how to ask it to do the specific task at hand. And there's something a little bit romantic about that. As for me, I'm just really happy that I've had the chance to have a foot in both worlds. And while I've certainly used computers before and after the Apple IIc, it was this computer that I really cut my teeth on when learning how to program, code, and really use a computer. In a big way, I think this computer really helped pave the way for my career in computers and the internet, and even in making videos that I publish here now. And I'm really thankful for that opportunity. And that's why I was really excited to tell Steve Wozniak, who helped create pretty much everything in the Apple II, how much his creation had meant to me. And he was kind enough to sign the case of one of my Apple IIc computers. I've had that computer mounted and framed, and it hangs on the wall outside of my office, and I'm really proud to be able to show that off. So that's it. That's my Apple IIc. Maybe there's another computer that you recognize from when you had early days with computers, or maybe there's something that, if you are too young to remember any of these computers, it looks interesting to you or weird or bizarre. Tell me in the comments section if you would like to see another one of these computers, and if so, which computer would you like me to pull out next? We've got a whole lot of other things that we can do here on the GTOger channel, and while I know it's not a tow truck, hopefully you'll have fun with me and we can explore some new things together. I hope you're doing great, you're having a fantastic day, and I will see you in the next video. I finished 2 pages.